red light is on? Okay. Okay, I want to call this meeting to order. The Arts, Recreation, and Community Policies Committee. Oh, there's our chair. Just as I was getting the hang of the microphone. Do you want me to continue to get your coat off and everything, Mr. Chair? Okay. So we've called the meeting to order, and now approval of the agenda. Can I have a mover, please, for the agenda? All right. Councillor Candon? With the addendum? Yeah. Okay. And the addendum. Is there an addendum? Yeah. Oh, yeah, just... And everyone's seen the addendum, so we have one extra piece of correspondence that was sent by email this afternoon. Okay, so approval of the agenda with the addendum, moved by Councillor Candon and seconded by Councillor Holland. Did you have your hand up? Okay, great. All in favor? Excellent, it carries. Next is confirmation of the minutes. We last met on February 25th. Is there a mover for the minutes, please? Moved by Chair Hutchinson and seconded by Councillor Holland. And all those in favor of the minutes, it carries. Excellent. Does anyone have a pecuniary interest to disclose? Nope. Seeing none, we move on to delegations. And our first delegation, I call upon Mr. Hank Weavers, who's Friends of the Phoebe, and he's going to speak to the committee regarding Civic Collection long-term plans for the steam launch Phoebe. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, we are grateful that we have a short period of 5 minutes, I guess, to give a little introduction of what we like to familiarize with. Here she is. For people who don't know the Phoebe, she is a 48-foot steam launch, and she was with the Pump House Steam Museum, has been with the Pump House Steam Museum for the last, since 1979. The Pump House Steam Museum was actually a gift by volunteers, finished in 1971 as a tercentennial project. So she has been at the museum almost as long as the museum itself. She was actually brought into the museum in the core collection by Jack Telkman, who was the founder and first curator of the Pump House Steam Museum. She is on her way here to Ottawa. Parks Canada had rented her in 1982 for the festivities in Ottawa of the 150th anniversary of the Rideau Canal. So she has a rich history, and we all know about that. Just a kind of an aerial view of the site. This is the rear yard of the museum, and it is a little bit of an imposing picture from the shelter. But I wanted to show you that this is the old building here. On the left, you see just the edge of the Pump House Steam Museum with a little bit of a lean-to, what I call a gray lean-to. That will be incorporated in the museum extension, and the museum extension will be a little bit more towards the right on the picture. But what I'm wanting to convey to you is that there is no need for the Phoebe and the shelter to be dismantled to allow for the new extension, because there is about the width of a city street between the new building and this particular shelter. Now, we never chose that location. We would have liked to have her in the northwestern periphery of the yard where that fence is. You see where the apartment buildings are, and then the fence separates the apartment buildings from the Pump House Steam Museum. So we are talking a little bit about option 1 and option 2, where we would like to see her relocated in the Kingston area and not being shipped to Toledo. The new extension can be seen here. It's basically a glass structure for offices and for wheelchair accessible washrooms. And if you remodel the timber frame structure that you just saw, or you build a new exhibit shelter, then the footprint is approximately what you see here in the right of the picture. So if that were done, she would take about 5% of the yard space. Staff wants to have the yard as a flexible public place for events and all that, and we fully agree with that. But if she were to be relocated on the northeastern perimeter of the museum, She would not interfere with the fuel lines from the Lake Ontario. She would not interfere with the fuel lines from the museum onto Lake Ontario. And she would not obstruct in any main way the residents in the apartment dwelling, in the apartment building that also would like the fuel lines unobstructed. The shelter was built by a group of high school students and a teacher. The timbers, as you see, come from British Columbia through a donation of Goodfellow Lumber from Quebec. And we got cash donations from the Upper Lake Shipping from Toronto, plus, of course, a lot of cash donations and volunteer work from the local citizens and businesses that supported us. The Phoebe is fairly high on a trailer here, but we could remodel that trailer and she could go much, much lower towards the grade level. So we could do two things for option 1 and 2. One is to take the cupola off and to make the shelter much lower and lower the Phoebe so that she becomes wheelchair accessible as well. So she can basically be viewed from grade level. Or we hope dismantle this structure and build it somewhere else in Kingston for general use, like Grass Creek Park would be wonderful. The structure is 22 by 60 feet. And build another relative simple shelter for the Phoebe. We are not looking for air conditioning or for humidity controlled environment. She is not the Vasa in Sweden. She has been around for 104 years now, and she is in a perfect location, acknowledged by several museum directors here on the shore of Lake Ontario, winterized in a proper way and exhibited in the proper way.
One more minute.
One more minute.
Yeah.
If you decide to relocate it and dismantle the shelter, I would hope that you respect what these people have put into that. These are high school kids, that is their building, and it is history in the making. She can go to Toledo, and in kind of a perverse way, we are honored that Toledo thinks that she is an artifact that is sufficiently important that they want to go the full length to bring her to Toledo, but it's not our first option. Our first option, by the way, we supported all 3 options that we discussed with staff, but our first option is option 1, and the second one is option 2. So she could go on the road for 750 kilometers, but I think you will run into major technical obstacles to get her there safely. And I must say that the staff discussions with Toledo are only just a story at the moment, are only just a conversation. So we would hope that your committee looks at this and refers the report back to staff so that we can give input that would deliver a much better solution than we have in front of us. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Reefers. Do we have any questions for the delegation? No questions? Okay, I have some. Mr. Reefers, can you just go back to the picture that shows the grounds? So where I read on your website, or one of the reports, I've done so much reading I can't remember where, but it talked about the northeast corner and how Ontario Street, you think it's north, but it's not really, and east-west. Is that the northeast corner, or is it on the other side of the pump house?
No, you see the yellow apartment building? If you go to the left, you travel north along the perimeter of the yard. So the shelter would be partly shown here, but otherwise she would be positioned against the Pump House Steam Museum building.
Great, that's what I thought, but then when we were talking about this picture, I thought it was right there where those blue spruce trees are, so it is on the other side then.
Yeah, it was basically, it takes only about 5% of the footprint of the yard. Okay,
thank you. And for the trailer that you showed, that's what the Friends built, correct? Or that you paid for, the trailer?
Sorry?
The trailer that you showed in the very last picture, you paid. Yeah,
that's all donated by the Friends of the Phoebe, yes. And we could modify the trailer because the trailer is built in a way that she also is supported by a cradle on the trailer. So you could take the wheels off and use the trailer bed as a frame on which he can rest in a static position.
And if we did that, that would lower it even closer to the ground.
Yeah,
Would that be?
if you want to know precise numbers, Paul Jeffrey here has designed an option where the lowering can be such that you can observe the Phoebe part of the hull, but mostly the deck and the cabin and everything, and the steam engine and the boiler from your standing position. And that would also give access for wheelchairs. We have ideas about that. There are several ideas that staff should look at, and maybe we can come to an optimal solution.
My last question is with regard to Toledo. I know that the reports were all talking about like as a long-term loan, but if the city did a short-term loan, what would you consider short-term? Like, I know that there is fear from some of the letters to the editor that if it goes to Toledo long-term, it will stay there forever and people will forget about it. If it was short-term, I just wondered if the Friends would be more amenable to 2 years or 3 years. Like, what would be the maximum length of stay that you would feel better at?
Well, we actually put staff in touch with Toledo. We got that offer from Toledo about a year back when I contacted the curator there and the executive director. We had contacts with them all along. I think that Toledo would not go for a short-term loan because they are fundraising at the moment, and when the city makes a deal with Toledo, they would incorporate it in their fundraising. And so they would specifically make something for the Phoebe to put her on display over there. And they wouldn't go to that kind of length to do that because it would cost a lot of money for them as well. Also, if you put her on that 750 road trip and a year later you bring her back to Kingston, one of the local experts in boat hauling said that she would arrive in sticks and bits and pieces, and I think that is exaggerated, but there would be, nevertheless, there would be damage if you took her on a round trip for 1,500 kilometers within a time span of 1 or 2 years. So I think if Toledo remains an option, she should go there for a long term, 10 years, and I think the city might well kiss her goodbye then, because what happens after 10 years, who would bring it up to bring her back to Kingston? And if you even were planning on that, you might as well bite the bullet right now. And properly display her as part of the Pump House Steam Museum or in another location in the city.
Any further questions, or that's it? Oh, yes, Councillor Candom.
Thank you. Sorry, I was talking as you finished up that last piece there. What would be the issue with moving it temporarily in the city to another location where we put it in another notable space on the waterfront?
Temporarily in another location.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you should not look at temporary solutions. That might be politically advantageous, but I think it would not be a benefit for the boat itself. It's an important artifact. Staff is extremely concerned about caring for her. So they want a humidity-controlled environment. The only humidity-controlled environment is a warehouse. So if you look for a short-term solution, then pop her in a warehouse. But I don't think that is what the citizens of Kingston want. Because if you put her in a warehouse, then there is no incentive to look for solutions, and she will be a long time in a warehouse. We have that kind of feeling, not only ourselves, but lots of people mention that to us.
Okay. And you made the suggestion of moving the boat to the northwest corner of the lot.
Yes.
What is the biggest issue with that? It seems pretty straightforward. It doesn't seem like a...
Well, staff has some issues in their report to the Museum Advisory Committee, and cost is one of them. I checked that their cost quotation is about 3 to 4 times higher than the average cost of building a similar structure, either in Ontario or even New York City. They also have brought up the problem of wave surge, and I didn't know what wave surge was, and I don't know if you know what wave surge is, but once in 100 years, a wave can come from Lake Ontario if there is a 2% chance that once in 100 years the wind and the lake cooperate in such a way that you get a wave bashing into the shore and throwing some water on the yard in the Pump House Steam Museum. I have checked that report, and the area where that might happen is not where the location of the new exhibit will be. So the new exhibit at the northeast corner of the Pump House Steam Museum would be outside that so-called wave surge. So putting it somewhere else in Kingston is one of the options. That's option 2. And we would not be against that, but it should be a long-term solution.
Okay. And how much money, I guess I've already asked 2 questions, but I was just going to say, how much money is the rough estimate to move it into the suggestion you made?
Well, it all depends what route you go. If you go for a remodeling of lowering the profile of the existing structure, that would be, I think, we kind of estimated with the company who built the structure, would be relatively inexpensive, around $100,000 maybe. Because the foundation, a simple strip foundation, would cost you $40,000, so that is the main expense. Okay. However, if you go for another exhibit shelter and you ask the architect in Toronto to make that air-conditioned and completely compatible with his new glass structure on the building, it could be a lot more. Staff claims that could be up to $561 or $570 a square foot, but I just indicated to you that if you look a little bit more carefully, that could be a lot cheaper. But then you look, I think, at probably around $150,000 to $200,000. Mm-hmm. Now, locating the timber frame structure itself in another location, let's say Grass Creek Park, and have the Phoebe exhibited at the McLaughlin Woodwork Museum, would also be very relatively inexpensive because the timber frame structure can be dismantled. If you look at that, you can see from what these students did that it's all like a Meccano set. These joints are all pinned together, so they can be numbered and they can be dismantled, and they can be anywhere else in Kingston. You can set up this shelter as it was before. Mm-hmm. So that would be a relatively simple solution too. We think that you can enclose this shelter. Where are we? Thank you. We can very easily enclose this shelter, and the architect who designed it was Wilson Architects in Kingston, an award-winning architect, and the Heritage Committee at the time approved all this, and they already pre-approved the enclosure of this structure. So you could enclose it fairly simply with either in the front with glass panels, on the sides and in the back with solid panels. And also during the construction, in order to protect the Phoebe, this timber frame structure is sturdy enough, but to protect the Phoebe, you could simply put a plywood enclosure there during the construction, and that would perfectly protect her. So we submit that it's not necessary for the construction to go ahead to dismantle the whole thing and put it in a warehouse, because that would cost you quite a bit of money too. Storage costs are anywhere between $5,000 and $8,000 a year.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Chair.
No, Councillor Hutchison, I think, when I'm sitting down here. In your opinion, what is the general shape of the Phoebe? Its condition? What condition is the Phoebe in?
Okay, good. When we found her, I say when we found her, when I retired, I discovered her in a shed in the back of the Pump House Steam Museum. She was under management by the Marine Museum then. She was half in the water, and so under the waterline, what you see here, basically under the waterline, she was completely destroyed. But the superstructure is all original. And we restored it. The late Jonathan Watson, marine surveyor, gave us instructions how to restore it. We were supervised by Mr. Watson. We also had some supervision, other people from both historians from Toronto and others helping us out in in doing what we ought to do to museum quality. So we completely rebuilt the keelson. The keelson is brand new. The keel is brand new. We put new planks in. So she's not seaworthy in the sense that we would not like to see her back on Lake Ontario. Some people say, oh, she should go back to the water. But she's like a canoe with a heavy engine and a heavy boiler in it. She was never built for Lake Ontario. She was built for the smaller lakes in northern Ontario and southwestern Ontario. She went actually by railway from the Davies Dry Dock Company to the Muskokas, and that is where she started her life. The condition she is in now is perfect. There are no rotted areas or whatever. The last time museum staff repaired a few spots, but that was it. She is in perfect condition. She is 104 years old. The superstructure you see is original. Everywhere you see the white part of the hull, that is original. All the hardware is original. The steam engine is a Davies Dry Dock original steam engine, and the boiler is a Davies Dry Dock safety tube boiler, originally from 1914. She is as old as the steel locomotive in Confederation Basin. And she is built by similar types of craftspeople in an Edwardian area. So she's a true example. By the way, she's one of the very last steamboats that were produced at that time, because most boats switched over to gasoline propulsion. So she is a real historic gem, and that is why Toledo would love it, to have them. The Americans have a great appreciation for their history. I hope that the Kingstonians have similar appreciation.
Another question, but I forgot when you were speaking. I forgot what it was. It had to do with so the main connection to Kingston is it was built here, and and she was used in the Muskokas. Was she a recreational vessel or a commercial
Yeah, it
vessel?
was pure recreational.
Okay.
And then,
But she wasn't used here in Kingston, but she was brought back here because she was built here.
well, there is a lot of history there too, because she went from Kingston, she was built in Kingston, delivered to the Muskokas, and Davies Dry Dock Company built a lot of boats, of which this one is the only left. They also got in the automotive industry, and they went bankrupt for that. But there's a lot of local history in terms of the Davies Dry Dock Company that had built her. Then she went to the Muskokas. From there, she went to a collector in Mary's Lake, near Lake Erie. From there, she went to Put-in Bay, and from there, she went to Mentor Harbor on Lake Erie. From there, she went to Lake Skaneateles, and then she came back to Kingston by the late Jack Kalkman. He had organized a lot of steam regattas in Kingston. There was a big deal. Every year there was a big steam regatta in Kingston, and the Phoebe was an ambassadress for Kingston, as you can see on what I have here. Oops, where am I? She was an ambassadress for Kingston, not only going to Ottawa, but she also went to Clayton across the lake. Now, those were trips that kind of were very demanding of her. And on one of the last trips, the volunteers put her in the boathouse, where 15 or 20 years later, I kind of saw her and decided to restore her. At that time, the city wanted to send it to Clayton for restoration. Clayton would love to have her for restoration, but I felt with a group of friends of the Phoebe, and some of them you see here, we felt that Canadian heritage should be taken care of by Canadians. So the plan to send her to Clayton fell through. Some local business people had provided a fair amount of money for her restoration, but it fell through because we basically took over the restoration and did it with Kingstonians, did it with Kingston support, did it with materials that I just pointed out to you. The support of Goodfellow provided all the lumber. Upper Lake Shipping provided money, local business people provided support, Glen Supply Lumber was involved, you name it. So the history in Kingston, yes, there was a hiatus between when she was built and when she came back, but the whole idea of bringing her back home and exhibiting her since 1979 at the Pump House Steam Museum was an important decision, and it shows you the support we get from lots of people. She's known right across Kingston. And she's known elsewhere too. People in the United States know her, and people in Europe know her.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions, thank you very much, Mr. Reaver, for your presentation. Thank you. All right, so committee, now we go in, there's no briefings. We're at number 6 on the agenda. Now we go into business number 7, and the first item A is the recommendation, the report received from the museums. Oh, yeah. Okay, all right. So for item 7A, I turn it over to staff if they would like to introduce it. And Mr. Robertson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just by way of a bit of context for the recommendation that came from the Museums and Collections Committee, I thought I'd say a few words just to give you a bit of background as to how that decision came to be. I think the report was sent to you later at one point today, but I'll do a quick run through so you have a sense of where this has come from. The issues around the Phoebe and what we're proposing should be done with her are very much part of the kinds of questions that we face with the Civic Collection all the time. So the collection owned by the City of Kingston, these are the same kinds of issues of care, storage, interpretation, relevance to community, all those kinds of things. So this is, the Phoebe becomes a test case in many respects for just how we look after our collection that we, the people of Kingston, own. This has been a discussion over the last number of months, and staff certainly have been looking at this in various ways since last summer, last autumn, when our original report went to the Museums Committee. Through that whole time, we've been in dialogue with the Friends of the Phoebe, so that this has been a form of community consultation as we've been developing our plans. In the course of coming up with the original set of recommendations that were presented to the Museums and Collections Advisory Committee, of which there were 7, there were a number of sort of baseline considerations that we took into account, which I'll just review for you here so you get a sense of what kinds of things, criteria we were looking at as we were assessing each of the options. One of those is the evolving mandate of the Pump House Steam Museum, where the Phoebe is certainly has been located since she first came back from away. And that, in the course of time since the culture plan, just how the museum currently relates to community and how we as staff have been trying to position it with a slightly broader mandate than what had been more tightly focused on STEAM technology. We've also been looking at the challenges posed by the upcoming construction of the accessible washroom addition, sort of the last element in the upgrades we're making to the museum right now. This has been in process for some time, and as you heard a few minutes ago, that addition will be added to the back of the museum, which takes some space up within the yard, but most importantly, it gives us an accessible washroom space and additional workspace for the museum to improve what it does as a facility. It also is related to just the way we're reconceiving how the backyard facing onto Lake Ontario, how that works. We're trying to, what was once, when it was a working water pumping station, was a coal dump, that has evolved now into a community space and certainly an amenity space for the museum so that we can do a variety of types of programming, and we're looking at as broad a scope as we can use on the bit of land that we have there. At the same time, we're also trying to address the emerging waterfront master plan and just the way the museum relates to the water. Its theme being water, it seems logical for us that the museum should be as open to the waterfront as best we can make it. And certainly just the way the Phoebe and its shelter is positioned right now, that forms a bit of a visual block in terms of how we relate to that waterfront. And of course, just in position where it is currently with the way the addition will be added. We're also looking at certainly the historical and interpretive value of the Phoebe, which you've heard quite a bit about this evening. And certainly it's recognized she is a significant piece within the civic collection. So that's acknowledged. That had to go into our thinking, our background thinking. But at the same time, looking at it as an artifact, a large wooden artifact, it's the appropriate professional treatment that something like that requires, which is something, I know, as staff, that we have to take into consideration as we're looking at after all of the collection. The ongoing and increasing maintenance and security requirements to look after something like that. She is in very good shape now. That's certainly with the efforts of the Friends of the Phoebe over the years, and staff has taken over that much of that maintenance role now. The work and the expense that has been put into ensuring that she is in good condition. But at the same time, she's still in an open shelter where she's located. And as much as we can winterize, it's still exposed to Lake Ontario. It's best we, anything we do, she's still sitting there right beside Lake Ontario. We certainly acknowledge the passion, the generosity of the volunteers over the years. The Phoebe would not be in the condition it is in now if it had not been for the efforts to bring her back to Kingston and to look after her in the way that has been. As I say, staff has now taken over that role. The other is just the ongoing costs and regulations associated with the options that we looked at. There were a variety of different pros and cons, if you will, as to which worked the best. So of the 7 options, staff looked at them, assessed them, and narrowed it down to 3. And the 3 specifically were either, one of them, keeping the Phoebe on site in a new location. So in a newly built designed shelter, but in a new location. And the thought was, and this is based on, in part, on an idea that came from the Friends of the Phoebe, and that was to dig essentially a trench so that the Phoebe could be lowered down so that people could interact with her at ground level instead of it being raised up the way it is on the trailer. You'd actually get to see it at ground level, but in an enclosed shelter, so the issues that I was just describing with it being exposed to Lake Ontario would be alleviated. There certainly were options as to whether or not you put in a heating, ventilation, and cooling system or not, and professional expertise varies on what's the best system, but that would be, if that were an option that were being followed, obviously staff would investigate what works best. The second option was to do the same type of treatment, but actually to do it on another city-owned site, so moving it somewhere else. In the discussion paper, an example of a place it could go was Grass Creek Park, McLaughlin Woodworking Museum. Not to say that's the only spot, but that's one spot. Certainly, I should go back, say about the keeping it at the museum. Some of the costs associated with that site, as I mentioned, it was former industrial site, a coal dump. Some of the costs associated with moving it and building a new shelter are dictated by just the nature of the soil and the groundwater. There would be a certain amount of money would have to be expended to remediate the soil that's there and to remove groundwater during the construction and on an ongoing basis. Whereas if we were to move it to another site, those would not be, hope to select a site that didn't have the same soil and water issues. And of course, the third option, to move it to another museum, that's actually, over the last number of months, or year I should say, we've actually investigated a variety of options, different museums, particularly with a marine focus, to see if any of them would be willing and able, had capacity to take the Phoebe, either on a short or a long-term basis. And the suggestion, as you've heard, of Toledo, Ohio being the one, that's in large part because we've looked at all the other options at present that are currently available in this general region, and Toledo was the one that actually had capacity to take her under the conditions that we as staff were hoping for, which is a protected site, is in large part is the issue. I don't want it going to a place that preferably that would still be sitting in an open boathouse. And Toledo has expressed interest. And at this point, it's completely been a conversation. There's certainly been no negotiation. So the museum committee looked at the three options that were presented, and option 3, to move it to another site, was the one that Museum and Collections Advisory Committee selected, recommended be the option to follow. And that's the core of what I was going to say. Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize you
It's all
were
right.
finished.
That's it. Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that introduction. And now I'll take questions from the committee. And Councillor Camden, I think you were the first one to have your hands up.
Thanks. And through you, if it was moved to a different city site, would we be able to rely on the people, like a similar story where community members kind of chipped in and created the building and structure and stuff like that to kind of save money and resources in order to move it successfully? If we were if we were to put it at Grass Creek Park, could we rely on people volunteering their time to kind of create something, or is that something that's wouldn't be considered?
The challenges with doing something like that would just be that we could meet all of the rules and regulations for construction, WSIB and insurance, and some of the, I think some of the methods that were used in past years with volunteer help, rules were a bit different, and we were able to do that kind of thing. Now I would say that we'd have to look into that, but certainly those would be considerations and perhaps restrictions that might preclude doing it quite that way.
And
So
Commissioner Beach?
Just to clarify on the options tonight as well, if you pick the option that you want to put it at another location, we'd have to do a detailed budget and a project, and then we would have to look at what component would have to be funded by council, and if there was a fundraising potential, we could do that. We did that with the 1095 locomotive and had volunteer help, but we'd have to frame and bring a more detailed plan back about how we would do that, and then assess what the volunteer or donations could achieve.
Okay, next question was Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, so in the first point, one of the considerations we've discussed before, I have not been on the Museums Collections Advisory Committee, but we have in other discussions here talked about the culture plan and the mandate associated with some of the museums. The idea of museums without walls, that kind of thing, all these great concepts which I'm very much in favor of. I'm interested, though, to understand a little bit more about why the Phoebe, what changes to the mandate would suggest that the Phoebe didn't fit in on that site. Is it to do more with the physical constraints of having the shelter and the Phoebe there? What that would limit the programming, or is it? How does it not fit into the proposed mandate of the museum?
Through you, Madam Chair. The Phoebe, when it was placed there, it made perfect sense. And it was also, the museum was largely run by the volunteers at that time. And as a available city space, it seemed a logical way to go. The way the mandate is evolving is the museum's, its core theme is certainly water. And one could argue, yes, the Phoebe fits the water theme. But it's also, in the absence of another civic museum space that we can do other broader programming. The Pump House is now beginning to fulfill that role. Hence, you may remember our traveling show we had from the Royal Ontario Museum last year on Egypt and the Gift of the Nile, which was again a water-based theme, but it was a much broader theme than I would say that Pump House would normally have been the home for previously. A lot of it, in terms of the programming of the backyard, we're trying to ensure that we have programmable space, multi-purpose space, and certainly the Phoebe and the size of the shelter, it does take up a certain amount of space. One of the plans that's been proposed that we're looking at right now is, as part of the re-landscape, is to introduce what we're calling a steam arcade. And certainly that tradition for many years of showcasing steam and that Victorian technology continues to be of interest. We can't actually run the pumps inside anymore, certainly, and with the redevelopment of the Engineerium several years ago to make it a multi-purpose gallery space, the engines that had been on display there and once were run had to be removed. So the notion was to move that outside and build an open arcade that we could actually run some of them on a periodic basis. That's a space issue. If you've been to the pump house in the last several summers, one thing that we always do is in terms of programmable spaces is put a marquee tent up so that we can have different group assemblies, different summer camps, a variety of different programming efforts that go on there. And the lawn is only so big. So that's in part why we're looking at how to make that as holistic a space as we can make it.
Mr. Wigginton?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I just wanted to further elaborate on that a little bit because it may not always seem obvious to people, but museums are dynamic places. They do change over time, and collections change up, focuses change, the kinds of programs change. And that's something that we're very excited about, that the city has given us the opportunity with the resources that we have to look at that kind of work through sites like the Pump House City Museum and the McLaughlin Woodworking Museum, and increasingly with City Hall. And to Paul's points, and Hank Weavers has spoken about this as well, there's a interesting history that's brought the Phoebe to where it is right now, which is tied to the fact that for a number of years, the Pump House Steam Museum was managed and run under a contract with the city by the Marine Museum. And, there was that connection between the Marine Museum and the Pump House, and the Phoebe is an example of marine recreation. And then, you sort of get into a process where you start rationalizing, well, it moved from the Marine Museum to the Pump House, and there was a connection there because it was a steam launch and the Pump House was about steam. And as Paul has said, we've sort of been seeing an evolution of sort of focus, and that's all part about making museums engaging, relevant to changing audiences. And so in no way in this process have been wanting to downplay the significance of the volunteer contribution across the years. In fact, much of Kingston's culture is built on the work of volunteers in many forms over the decades, and we celebrate that. We're just looking for an opportunity to be able to rationalize the work we're doing. And so Paul has outlined a number of the rationales that were used and presented to the Museum Committee for consideration. And this is part of that sort of ongoing evolution. And it's in no way about trying to diminish the significance of the Phoebe, but it's about trying to find the best way to move forward so that we can achieve a number of things. And so I think that notion of the changing mandate is very much part of that whole sort of evolution of this kind of work.
And Councillor Holland?
Thank you. And through you, I was looking for more information. Maybe there is some, just certainly not in this report, about the relationship between the Phoebe as it exists now and our tourism strategies, past and future. So if anyone could comment on what the value of the Phoebe is as an artifact in terms of our ability to bring tourists to the area, that would be great. And I can totally understand if you don't have that information because it's a different department altogether. But I'm just, the Grass Creek Park is a wonderful site, but it doesn't get the number of people that Ontario Street gets.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll try to answer that in a little, as much as I can. I mean, I think it's hard to sort of presume at this point how the Phoebe functions in terms of a draw for tourism. I mean, certainly the Friends of the Phoebe rightly point out that there is a group of people who are very enthusiastic about its history and see it as a draw, and certainly that's valid. I would think as we evolve how we're telling the Kingston story, and it's come up through some of the correspondences that you've received in relation to this motion as well, that we are starting to look more into things like the industrial history of Kingston. And I think, we've had a lot of discussion about the Phoebe. Would be fantastic if we could place it in Doug Fleur Park, for example. So it's actually in a closer adjacency to the original Davis Dry Dock. That has its challenges, and that's why it was one of the options that was proposed. Grass Creek Park, it's just because we happen to run the McLaughlin out there, and so there's a staff contingent who can also be responsible for it there. So, there's some expediency with that kind of solution. And Doug Fleur Park is more complicated because it would be a sort of standalone pavilion and would require a whole other level of sort of vigilance and responsibility, but certainly would help to tell a fantastic story about that part of Kingston. And that could potentially develop interest in terms of certainly local residents, but also people who are wanting to discover Kingston's story in more detail. So, there's a number of ways that you can rationalize and make that kind of case. And certainly the heritage of Kingston is one of our biggest selling points, and it's not something that we take lightly, and the Phoebe is part of that story. But, I think that there should be an opportunity to look at how we can move forward. And I think at the museum committee, one point that was made that I hadn't even really thought about was also the opportunity, if it were to go to another facility like the Toledo Museum, what a fantastic opportunity that is to highlight Kingston and another community, to celebrate that history, acknowledge the contributions of the volunteers who've preserved this piece of history. And in fact, it could potentially function as a calling card in that kind of context and be a draw for people. So, it's something that can obviously be well celebrated locally, but also has the potential to give Kingston profile in another context for, a amount of time, whether it's 2 years or 5 years, as that question earlier about the length of time. I think there's a number of positive possibilities, and it's just trying to figure out what is the best fit in this moment.
And Councillor Hutchinson, you had questions.
I'd like to know more about the, I wasn't at the committee meeting, so the options were presented, but I would like to know more about the arguments that were given. What people thought, why they arrived at this particular conclusion. Since it seems odd to me that you would have an historical artifact with ties to Kingston and then you would ship it out of the country. And it's very difficult to see why would we do that. Okay, so that's not my main question. My main question is, what arguments did people give for this particular option as versus one of the other options? I did like what Mr. Wigginton said about Doug Fleur Park, because I didn't so much like it as it made sense to me, okay? And it is sort of out of the way, but it has, what would you do about security, right? That's one of the advantages of the current site, is lots of people go by. So, and I understand that we're building up an addition, and who can be against accessibility? In fact, the province tells you must do these things. So, and better office space. I understand that whole rationale. So that's, I'm not sure it's a dead stop argument, though. So I want to know more about why the committee chose that. What were their arguments? Please, thank you.
I'll dive into this void. I think that all options were discussed at the committee, and I think that there was interest in all three of the options that staff put forward. In terms of having it be a valuable asset to the city, no one put forward the proposition. If it weren't valuable to keep the heritage of Kingston, we'd be saying let's divest it and put it somewhere where it would be more valuable. But in terms of the three options that were looked at, there were discussions around, in order to really realize the stories behind it, it does need to be reanimated, and there needs to be that piece behind it and how best to do that. I think the other piece, and I'm not a curator and I'm not an expert in terms of the preservation of this artifact, but I also know that some of the discussion was around what's the best way to preserve it. And if we're going to do an option that leaves it outside and it's a wood artifact and it was something that would be deteriorating over time, I think that the committee felt it would be better to move it to location where it would be inside, where it would be properly preserved, And then when Kingston, if we did decide at some point to consolidate and have a larger museum space, that would be the point that we build the proper space for the Phoebe to be reintegrated into that space. So I don't think on any level that people were saying it wasn't a valuable artifact, that it was something that did need to be animated to some extent, and that the best way to do that would be to put it at a site where there already was some activity and where we already have staff that are looking at doing programming. And then there was a lot of discussion about whether or not the committee should use cost as one of the criteria, because one of the aspects of relocating it on the site, one is the best way to preserve it, and from our research that we've done, we think that an internal enclosure should be looked at, and that should be one of the options that's looked at to keep it from a long-term perspective. We have provided the cost. It's basically a costing that was done on a concept looking at the Pump House Steam Museum site and having a cost quantity estimator look at that concept and price it. But if there was a desire for council to really find the long-term solution that would preserve it in the best way, and it was on that site, that we could certainly look at a more detailed costing and try and reduce the costs or look at fundraising. But we think that the cost that we've provided also is realistic, that in terms of the $510,000 that we have in this report, depending on what the final design is, we could increase it or lower it depending on what council's final decision was. But that's more detailed work that we'd need to budget for and could proceed with if council wants to do that. So I think in terms of the committee, they discussed all three options, and in the end, the option that was picked was the one that was a combination of preserving the artifact, preserving the stories, and finding a way to keep that artifact in a way that would preserve it longer term. So I don't know if the others want to add. I certainly can't speak for the committee.
The committee certainly was concerned that the objects stay in public view. I mean, there's certainly been lots of discussion about putting it into storage, and the recommendation in front of you does involve some period of storage prior to the construction happening this summer. But the committee was most interested in keeping it in the public view as best it could, and certainly sharing that Kingston story. And Mr. Wigginton referred to that. It saw this as a transition phase to allow, if it was going on loan as an ambassador for Kingston and Kingston's heritage and history, to another space, a space which actually has an historic connection with the Phoebe, because the Phoebe was owned by Ohio residents for 20 years between the 1940s and the 1960s. So there is some connection. In fact, even a piece of the Phoebe is in the museum in Toledo now. I think one of the former engines is in their collections. But the committee definitely felt that it would buy time at our end, and if we as a community here in Kingston felt that the Phoebe should be on display somewhere, it gave us time to think about how best to do that, how to accommodate it in whatever way or whatever site seemed most appropriate.
Not quite sure which direction to go. So how is this situation we're faced with? Like, I can see that everyone cares about the historical significance of the artifact. And in almost typical fashion, and this is not a bad thing, okay, this is a good thing actually, staff is concerned with the mid to long-term viability of the artifact. And that means significant cost. And the thing that attracts me is the whole connection to the Davis Dry Dock and our industrial past and so on. I'm surprised in Ohio. It's interesting to think, why in Ohio? What did they need to buy one of our boats? So anyway, what is different between this and the Spirit of Sir John A., which, as I remember, had a price tag of $1.5 million. With volunteer work, we brought it down to 1.2 or something like that, or maybe lower. Is that correct? I think that's reasonably close. The metal fitter, the fitters saved us a bundle of money, hundreds of thousands, right? So, along with the other folks. So to me, this is like a reprise of what we had to do before. The choice was get rid of it because it's almost dangerous, okay, and it doesn't have much life in it and it hasn't been worked on in like decades. And only the difference is that this one has been worked on. It's in good shape already. We're not fixing this artifact. Our problem is where to put it such that it's safe, secure, and can survive. But it's because it's wood. The other's metal, but that didn't help it much, it seems to me, when I went back. The real thing is what requisite care are you going to take? So that's my question. I don't see that there's a heck of a lot of difference. It's the only one left, I gather, or one of the very few. Is the only one? It's the only boat we have left from the Davis Dry Dock. That's what perked my ears up. The Davis Dry Dock is basically not there for all intents and purposes. So if you're going to look after your heritage, and this is the last piece left, largely, then maybe this is what we ought to do. This is the direction I'm going. And I'm provoking staff deliberately, okay? So don't take it personally. My deliberate provocation is, what's the difference? We didn't look after the other thing for 30 years. We've had somebody look after this for us. So, and it's $1 million cheaper. Okay? And I think that's what bothers people. It bothers me. And to me, even if it wasn't climate, I'm just trying to formulate the question is, the general question is, what is the difference? And I think I'm suggesting that there really isn't a difference. So, I mean, it's more important than locomotive, I guess, because more people see it, but, you know, I know those arguments. Okay.
Mr. Riggington will kick it off.
Through you, Madam Chair, and I think there was a question. I'll try and answer it there. There's two big differences, or one big difference and one big similarity. So you're absolutely right. The big difference between the Phoebe and the 1095 is we have a passionate group of volunteers who've ensured that the object itself has been very well maintained, lovingly maintained for a number of years. And as was pointed out, it's been on view for upwards of about 40 years in Kingston in various forms as a result of their efforts. And that's a big difference from the 1095. The similarity, though, is the realities of the location. And, you know, what has transpired is that in a time before council approved the culture plan and invested in the work that we've been able to do, efforts were made to locate the Phoebe in a spot that probably now in 2016 is not ideal and probably would have been considered in a different way if circumstances were different. So it was placed in the backyard of the Pump House Steam Museum because of this connection with, in part, the Marine Museum. And it was positioned in such a way that it was on a trailer adjacent to a fence that could open so that the Phoebe itself could be taken in and out if necessary for public display, you know, whether that would be, and this has happened, it was taken down to Metalcraft Marine at one point not too many years ago to show off that connection historically. And there was always desire that the Phoebe would be somewhat more portable than it's proven to be for various reasons to do with its care. So it's on a trailer in a very high shed to protect it, which, you know, moving forward is a issue that we've been trying to address for a long time, partly because of the location and the fact that it does impact our ability to use the backyard of the museum successfully along the waterfront. And a huge issue that we've tried to wrestle with over the years is accessibility. So it has a temporary metal staircase and platform adjacent to it that allows people to get up to a level that they can actually see and appreciate the Phoebe, but it's something that is prohibitive. We've looked at different opportunities to provide some sort of ramping or other lift device that would help people get up to be able to see the Phoebe, and that's not something that's proven doable because, the rise on a ramp and all that kind of stuff that it would require to be able to get someone up to that level just isn't a viable thing. And so there's a number of challenges with its location and its function right now that are problems that have needed to be solved. And so that's why one of the options was to honor that connection to the pump house, keep it on site, but then be very realistic about the fact that we're now in 2016 dealing with things as Mr. Robertson pointed out, to do with the coal dump, the need for remediating the ground that it's on, potentially providing a trench that would allow the boat to be lowered so that it would be accessible to all visitors to the museum so they could interact with it more successfully. But then that brings with it issues of things like the wave uprush that were mentioned, which are determined by the Cataraqui Regional or Conservation Authority. We get into those kinds of due diligences that the city would have in terms of trying to relocate it. So that's where it's very similar to the 1095, because a lot of that project was purely about shoring up that artifact, because you might recall that one of the big challenges was it was starting to sink into the ground where it was sitting, and we had to go to pretty extreme measures to do archaeology on that site, create concrete piles, move the locomotive onto that firmer footing, and that was a big chunk of that project. And so that's essentially what we're looking at here, is that we have the benefit of preserved artifact, but we have the reality of a less than ideal location and presentation, something that we've been trying to work around for quite a while and looking to a solution that would potentially be more suited. And so, as the report originally pointed out to the committee, it is doable. But there are issues at play and costs then that are incurred in terms of trying to make it as successfully integrated into the site for people to enjoy and to preserve the artifact. So does that help?
Commissioner Beach?
I don't know if I can add to that, but I do want to maybe just reiterate some of the sentiment around, if we're going to preserve the Phoebe and have it available for the public, that it is something that there does need to be some decisions made around those financial commitments. And it's not something that, from staff's perspective, when we put these three options together, we didn't want to do an option that just put it in temporary storage somewhere and said, well, let some future council make a decision around it, because we think that if we really want to keep it alive and have those stories interpreted and have it on the site at the Pump House Museum, that a proper treatment and a proper presentation so that there can be the programming around there is the right way to do it. So we have tried to put those costs, again, they're not even a Class D estimate at this point, and we would never come forward with a plan that tried to make it more expensive, but we also want to be realistic and say it will be an investment, even if we can get fundraising for part of that or volunteer contributions. Council will have to make an investment in keeping it in Kingston, and we don't think pushing it off somewhere is the right solution. It's deal with it properly on the site, or put it somewhere where they can present it and interpret it as well.
Okay, that's good thinking. There's nothing wrong with that. I just wondered, in a more technical fashion, why it has to be put in a trench. Why couldn't it put in a cradle at ground level? You'd still have to dig around it aside from the climate controlled bit, okay, which is where the real expense is, I suspect. If it could be put in a cradle, and just like boats are, I know there'll be weight-bearing issues, but perhaps that can be addressed. So in some other way, like a sleeve inside a cradle that takes the boat. I'm just looking for ways where we don't have to dig down and get into contamination. If we were going to put it, if we put it in Doug Floyd Park, that would not, I suggest, solve our problems as far as contamination are concerned. So we need another concept. That's what I'm suggesting. But at least, even before you talk about covering the boat, you got to solve the problem of how to house it, right?
So the options as were put forward by staff would be if council believes that the option to keep it on site and that's the best solution for the community to go forward, that we would have to then prepare the budget to do that detailed design and actually figure out with the configuration, we would have to work with the neighbors that are next door as well and look at the site plan process, look at the design to make sure that whatever was proposed minimize costs from an engineering perspective as well as made it accessible for people to come in and look at. So at this point, we don't have a detailed design. I don't think that in terms of the $510,000 that are proposed, that's astronomically out of the realm of what it would cost. And we would have to come up, we would propose if that's the option that council wants to do, we would come forward with a budget to do that detailed design and costing so that council could move forward with it. Again, we don't think status quo is a good option, and if you want us to find the right configuration on the site, we'll do a detailed design that will look at that.
Councillor Camden?
Thank you. I guess I've had this conversation's provoked a few thoughts from me, and I think that the concept of Douglas Fleur Park, and when I first got on council, I made comments that one of the first meetings we had, that I feel that Douglas Fleur Park is kind of a underutilized space, and I see a lot of opportunity there. I am pretty sure that Abna Investments is doing a significant development on one of the derelict buildings, the old building, I think it's on North Street. So they're going to be redoing a building there, which in all likelihood, I'm guessing will be spectacular if it goes based on what you see at the Woolen Mill or SNR. And part of me wonders if that landlord who is going to own quite a cool building on what's pretty close to the waterfront at North Street on an underutilized space and the Woolen Mill, that space won't become a more high traffic area for people to go. I'm kind of thinking of something similar to, say, the Tet Center, a building that was certainly underutilized and now is quite a beautiful, vibrant, awesome place to go for everybody in Kingston. So I certainly see opportunity there. And I think that if we don't, let's say the boat doesn't go there, I feel like that might be what goes in its place. And this could be a cool thing to put there and kind of start maybe a little bit of a rejuvenation there. And when I was thinking of somebody who could build a building or a cover for this, I'm thinking that a company like Abna might be really good at choosing how to build a structure that's quite beautiful to show off a building like that, because there aren't really that many people in Eastern Ontario who could build a cool, beautiful structure to complement a vessel like that. So I'm wondering if, while they're doing their construction on North Street, we couldn't approach them to try to see if they'd be willing to build a complementary space to put a unique boat like that. Is that something that we could even entertain, or am I speaking way out of turn?
Maybe just to speak specifically to the 9 North Street site, that particular site itself would not be large enough to put another building on it. They've accommodated, they're proposing converting the building into residential development, and then there's some parking along the side as well. So if we were looking at anything, it would have to be something directly in the park. I think what we're saying as staff is if there is another alternate location that council feels that they want to look at, we can go forward with that piece. I guess from a museum perspective, though, we know we already have multiple sites that we're trying to program across. So City Hall being the most popular one, the Pump House Steam Museum being the next, and then the McLaughlin Woodworking Museum from the city's perspective being the lower use because of its location. To add another site, we could look at it. It's just if you integrate it with the programming that's already in an existing location, from an operational perspective, that becomes easier to do. If it were in Doug Fleur Park, we'd have to propose that do the public consultation, and then figure out what would actually be the programming around that node.
I guess I just see it as an opportunity, like the TET Center, I think, is a home run, and we have an opportunity at Douglas Fir Park. I don't know what that's going to look like, but this seems like a nice little piece that could be considered.
Any further questions from the committee? Because I have 3 questions. You know? All right, so I'll go ahead. So if we did consider Toledo, and maybe this was discussed a bit at the committee, do you think the city expectation would be that the city, like us, that we would pay for the transportation of the Phoebe to Toledo and back? I know we haven't really gotten into discussions with the museum owner in Toledo, but do you think that would be our position?
Usually when there's a loan of that nature, there's a discussion between the two parties. The way we were looking at it, we would probably cover the transportation there and back, but all expenses associated with the Phoebe while she's on site at the other museum would be absorbed by the other museum, including care and insurance, so that once she's out of Kingston, so to speak, that becomes the responsibility of the other boring museum to look after her.
Was there any, do we have any high-level estimate of what it might cost us to ship the Phoebe down there? I heard, I can't remember if it was from Councillor Schell, and I don't remember if the amount was right, but I think I either heard $20,000 or $40,000.
No, sorry. It was actually more like $5,200. We did do an initial estimate to get a sense of what it would be to put the vessel on a proper trailer, so that it, not on the trailer it's on currently, but it would be on a flatbed, a protected flatbed, and it would be $5,200. I mean, could be as high as $6,000.
That would be one way?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, on a flatbed. Great. And my second question is, in the cultural plan, if the city of Kingston did ever build or find like a new museum space, is that actually in the cultural plan, and what year is it kind of etched in for? I know it's been the talk since 2006 with Bill Glover, and probably well before he was ever on council, but in the cultural plan right now, what year is that loosely slated for?
So there's no year that we've consolidated and said that there's going to be a large expansion or consolidation of museums. There is money that's currently identified in the budget to do a review of the museum's operations, and that's something that we are looking at doing and is on the work plan for this year to do. So in terms of a future large expansion or expanded, we're currently focusing on the 3 locations that the city has, and then I guess I don't want to underplay either the fact that we have 19 museums locally as well. And from a tourism perspective, we're really looking at with our grant program and the programming that they're providing, that it's really not just one individual artifact or one individual site that we're trying to promote. It's the experience of coming to Kingston and having those different experiences at the museums. So there's no money in the budget right now for a big expanded museum. That's something that through our evaluation, it would be highly unlikely that we'll propose that. But if council and the community feel that at some point, they'd have to start to bring that forward as an option. We're really looking at trying to optimize the sites that we have and trying to bring more people in and have more programming and use not just, I'm focusing on those 3 buildings, and I'm just undoing some of the work that we've been really trying to do with the museums, is that we're trying to also bring things out to where people are. So we started with some of the things that we do at the Grand Theatre. We know there's lots of people that come to the Grand Theatre. We do interpretation and we bring them out to where people are as well. So the concept of museums without walls is that we're trying to have those experiences where people already are as well. So as opposed to trying to build a physical building somewhere, where can we reach out to people and have them participate?
Thank you. And my last question is, around option 2, relocating the Phoebe to another location, which could be a park, it could be Doug Fleur Park or Grass Creek Park or wherever it might go. I just wondered, have we already started collaborating with park staff? Like, are park staffs even amendable to, like, say a proposal tonight was to move the Phoebe to Breakwater Park, which I was seriously considering last Sunday. And until Tuesday night when I heard Neil Unsworth say that Breakwater Park, the detailed design phase is basically completely finished. And then I thought, oh, so much for that idea of putting the Phoebe there. So I just wonder, like, do park staff, do they even have this on their radar? Do they know that we're maybe considering putting the Phoebe in a park and how their reaction is?
So if the option is for council that you want to put in another location and we think a park is a good location, then we would have those discussions. But right now, with the options that are here, we're looking at reconfiguring it on the existing site as being one of the potential things. If we wanted to look at something like Doug Fleur Park, and that's already gone through a whole community consultation process, and we want to add a feature like this, we'd have to consult with them and come up again with a detailed budget of what it would look like and figure out, is there some community goodwill or other things that we could have contribute. So, I mean, the short answer is no. We haven't consulted with them, and we're trying to kind of scope down, rather than going off and doing options for everything, what it is that council really would like to see.
All right, thanks very much. So that concludes the questions from the committee. Now I open it up to questions from the public. So if you would like to ask your question, we'll go one at a time. All the questions will be asked, and once everybody in the room has asked their questions, that's when staff will then try to answer all the questions that they heard. That's how we do other committee meetings when it gets open to the public. It just makes it more efficient that way. So there's microphones on this side or microphones on that side, and to ask your question, you can just step forward. And when you do ask your question, for the clerk's benefit, if you could first just say your name and your address for the minutes, and then start your question. Okay, so yes, you can go first. Thank you.
Patricia Fiore. I live at 26 Point Crescent. I'd just like to add a couple of more thoughts to the discussion. I don't have a question per se. And I'd just like to point out that in May 2015, a draft recommendation was made to UNESCO, which has been approved, for the protection and promotion of museums, their diversity, and their role in society. And this recommendation recognizes the current environment in which museums operate and how they should respond and contribute to society today in the world we live in today. Now, through the recommendation, there were two concepts that were really emphasized. And one was partnerships among museums. And this really hasn't been spoken to this evening. And from my perspective, and certainly from the perspective of the recommendation, there needs to be, and I think that this is a wonderful opportunity to build a partnership with the Marine Museum in Toledo and to share. I mean, this does take a piece of Kingston history there for people to see and appreciate, but also because it has an Ohio history as well. This is sharing, this is giving them an opportunity for them to enjoy a piece of their history. And so I think that this partnership could, because of the types of mandates and the similarities between the two institutions, there could be other partnership opportunities and ways of working together further down the road. So I see this as a great partnership opportunity. And certainly in today's operating environment, museums need to be forming those partnerships and sharing their stories, sharing their resources for the benefit of all of the public. Another concept that was emphasized in the recommendation was diversity. And a number of times the telling of stories has been mentioned this evening. And I'd like to say that, I'd like to add to that the Phoebe is a very important story to Kingston, but it is one story. And there are many, many more stories to tell, because as time moves on, we have new people in the community. We have so many more stories to tell. So the idea isn't that we're losing the history or we're saying goodbye to a piece of this history. It's just as valuable as it always was. But this is an opportunity for the resources that would have been put into the Phoebe over the 10-year period of the loan, if that goes ahead, is now, those resources can now go into telling other stories for other parts of the community, maybe that don't know some of the other Kingston stories or would like to have their own stories included in the history and the culture of Kingston. And so I just wanted to add that to the discussion. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much for those comments. Is there, yes, oh.
Oh, it's on. Oh, okay. I guess my questions actually are for staff. These three gentlemen and a lady next to me. If we
For the clerk, can you say your name and your address, please? I'm sorry about that.
Sorry. Paul Jeffrey, and I am a friend of the Phoebe. Sorry. As you all know already, clearly our first choice, of course, is to leave it at the Pump Steam Museum and either use a modification of the present timber frame structure or to come up with a new built structure from scratch. And that could be either following the footprints of the architect who come up with this glass.
Mr. Chair, could you ask the gentleman to speak into the mic? He's speaking to the committee, not to the staff.
Sorry. How close do I have to be? Is it clear?
If you keep it there, that's perfect. Yeah, it's not very directional. You have to be, head on.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Just to back up then, our first selection as Friends of the Phoebe and as a volunteer, who worked on the Phoebe, would be, of course, to keep it at the Pumpo Steam Museum. I say, of course, because that's where it's been for the last 40 years. And we have good ideas there. Of course, the one is the one which seems to fit best is either to use the modification of the present timber frame structure or to go ahead and start off from scratch and come up with a new structure, which could be actually patterned after the addition which is going on to the back of at least the proposed addition to go onto the back of the pump house now. So the whole thing would be in glass. That one would actually have quite a few advantages in the sense that it could be very low. It wouldn't block the view of any of the people in the apartment. It would minimize the space needed in the backyard, and it would certainly be less than 10% of the total space back there. In addition to that, it could be a locally built structure as well, which could be similar in size to a glass frames, a glassed-in structure, probably at much lower cost. If it isn't the pleasure of this group to leave it at the pump house, I have two other options, which I personally think make a lot of sense. One is a little a fairyland, perhaps, but it is really the best solution. And the best solution is to keep it right in the park here across the road from the City Hall and position it beside the 1095 steam engine. Now, there's all sorts of reasons. There are reasons why it shouldn't go there or can't go there because of space, because of the trees there, etc. And there isn't that much space. But having those two items together, the 1095 and the Phoebe, both built at the same time in 1914, both steam-powered, one representing the seagoing developments in Kingston at that time, and one representing all the locomotive area, which was on the waterfront for years and years and years. Having those two side by side would be a tremendous draw, and that is the ideal solution. It would probably require a common shelter covering both units. And when 1095 go up, it was initially the idea to actually have it in the shelter, but I guess the money wasn't forthcoming for that. But the Phoebe itself would require a shelter, being a wooden boat. So that would be the ultimate solution in a sense. But I think also a logical solution is to take it to the McLaughlin Woodworking Museum out on the road to Gananoque. It's still within the city. There's plenty of land there, as far as I can see. Drive it in there, there seems to be lots of land. I haven't actually walked it all and measured it all, so I can't argue in that point in specifics. But there certainly should be lots of land there. There is the place is staffed by people who do woodworking. The boat is it's a wooden boat. I mean, they are the natural ones to take care of it. Also, the present timber frame structure can be dismantled. It can be taken out there and reassembled, and it can then be enclosed. And as far as lowering the Phoebe so that it doesn't have to be or doesn't have to be visited, or it doesn't require a ramp and a platform to be able to observe it if we lower it down. And presumably at the McLaughlin Museum, because it's up fairly high off the water, this issue of wave action and all the rest, and leakage and all, shouldn't actually be there. So that, now, of course, the number of people who are going to see it yearly isn't going to be all that high, 4,000 to 5,000, but it's probably better than shipping it to another country. But because of the staff being there, and the security would also be there inherent, because during the working day it would be taken care of, and it could be locked up and enclosed to give the security as well.
Okay.
Doug Clark, I might add, just to throw that one in, is also another option. But I think the two I mentioned would be the ones I would prefer personally.
All right. Thanks very much, Mr.
Okay.
Jeffrey. Thank you. Is there anyone? Oh, sorry. Yes.
Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bill Visser. I am, I guess, the outgoing chair of the Museums and Collections Advisory Committee. Here for two reasons, actually, the progress report. But since this is up, I wanted to add a few things to the discussion, but most of the items I wanted to talk about has been taken by staff. But to the question that was asked earlier on about what was our thinking during it, a lot of people really would like to see long-term that the Phoebe would have been retained here, but the reality of it is, with the waterfront plan and everything else going on, there's just no place to put it right now. So the next best thing, and actually Crystal brought forward the idea I really liked, which was the one of make her an ambassador. She was at one point an ambassador for Kingston to other areas. in Ottawa on the Rideau. Make her an ambassador again. Send her to Toledo. Generate tourism. I'm big on tourism dollars, tourism marketing. And by sending her out as a display to other museums, as Patty had mentioned, sharing with other museums, then we'll get more people coming here to look at it and say, hey, I want to see more. So that's where a lot of our thinking was, which is why we came up with the recommendation that we protect her from any potential that might happen from the construction by moving her. And yes, send her to another museum, put her to work as an ambassador for a while. During that time, we can prepare a proper location for her when she comes home, and hopefully life will be good. That was our thinking at the time, and hopefully that helps, doesn't hinder. And you guys took so many of my points. I'm looking really horribly unorganized, but that's really what I wanted to clarify. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for those comments. And Mr. Dixon.
Okay, so Frank Dixon, Williamsville resident. So I've written this out, and I'll give it to the clerk at the end. That'll make it easier. So I am not an expert on this file, and I'm just new to it in the last 2 months. I've gone to MACAC twice, and I've talked to people. So I've got some points that are distinct from what others have said, and some of them are similar. So in the reports that have been presented to the committees, there's no photos or drawings of the ship. I find that to be, I guess regrettable would be the mildest word I would use. People here are dealing with dozens of files, and they might not be familiar with the ship. So I think that's a problem, and it should be remedied. We also have a problem. We've got the length of the ship provided at 14 and a fraction meters, but we don't have the height or the width of the ship provided. And we had the Friends of the Phoebe tonight provide a beautiful photo of 1982 of the craft, and the Week Standard provided a photo in their coverage last week. So, but official, paid by taxpayers, staff didn't provide any. So I got a problem with that. 14 meters is about the length of the hall that we walked through to this meeting, from this door down to the end of that hall, and looking at the photo, perhaps around the width of the hall as well. So that's about the size of the physical space that we need. Okay, so on the fourth delegation, we're just getting to that now. So this is an issue when it comes to envisioning the space that we would need for possible storage. Okay, now I've got a new point here, and I was told this by somebody who knows a lot, and I'm going to put it on the record, but I've not checked it independently. I've been told recently by a former Kingston City Councillor that the Phoebe is an artifact of national significance under federal designation. If so, this would affect conditions under which the ship could potentially be transferred. So that might be something to be examined by staff. My next point is I would have examined scenarios under which the Phoebe could be stored right where it is now in the expanded Steam Museum, which is already under renovation, as we've heard. And that's a City of Kingston facility. Okay, so I'm really surprised, as a tech person myself, if I was on the file, that's what I would have done. Given that we, value our history here and our heritage, can we find a way to carry on with the expansion and renovation of the museum, but on a larger scale so as to include the Phoebe inside it? And then we have issues of display and safety and so forth, and how we get people in there to take a look at it. I've seen examples in places like Glasgow and Amsterdam where ships of actually older vintages were displayed and stored in very clever ways. So I think that's an engineering problem, and I don't see it, as beyond solution. So it just seems to me that this is the perfect location. The Steam Museum is on the waterfront. We've got a waterfront master plan that we've just voted through council in the last couple of days. And there's plenty of space there. As we saw in the one photo that was provided during the original delegation. And I'm just really surprised it wasn't done, and I would like to see it done. To look at a scenario where that is possible, maybe with a couple of different cost estimates on the display. Okay. Now, this is getting more into sort of where we go from here. We're getting all this information tonight, and there's some gaps in it, and there's some questions raised by me and others. So what I'm looking for, since we don't have the MACAC committee existing anymore, it's been discontinued, and the Heritage Kingston Committee is going to be taking over part of its function under a merged or recreated structure from the MHC committee, that this committee either decide to defer the file until these questions and scenarios can be further examined, or to redirect it to Heritage Kingston for expert debate and examination that would keep the Phoebe in Kingston. This is a place where it was built in both a short and long-term basis. Now, at the MACAC committee, I did talk about the Doug Fleur Park option. That's been discussed by others, so I won't go into it again. But we're moving towards a visioning exercise for the former Kingston Penitentiary and the Portsmouth Olympic Harbor. That's coming up in the next few months. And that's got a waterfront location, and it's got bountiful possibilities. So maybe a long-term solution for the Phoebe could be evolved and transformed out there. And I guess my final point is I'm just curious as to, staff has had this vessel, this artifact, one-of-a-kind ship, there on city-owned property, yet they're talking about programming changes that are going to drive the Phoebe out of there. I would have thought that with a one-of-a-kind artifact in a place that values heritage and history, that the thinking would be different in terms of finding a way to keep the Phoebe. And it just seems to be that they've minimized the work that they're going to have to do and not really looked at the possibilities for honoring the mandate of council under the 6 priorities that we've seen. So thanks very much for that. And I'll write this out for the clerk.
Great, thank you very much. Are there other questions from the public? No? All right, so now it goes back to the committee, and now we have the recommendation of the report from the Museum and Collections Advisory Committee on the floor. And so we can start discussing it. Can I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor McLaren and seconded by Councillor Hutchison, just to put it on the floor. Councillor Hutchison, do you want me to continue on, or do you want to swap now? You want me to continue on?
Do you have ulterior motive for swapping? You have the motion. Oh, you want to put your motion, but you can do that by simply.
Yeah, I can do it from here.
Okay. So do you want to? Okay, you can give me the chair.
Bring it over to you. Yeah.
Okay, and then
Yeah.
I'll recognize you, but I have a question first, just so
Sure.
I know where you're going.
Yeah,
Do you
and-
want to discuss the current motion first, or do you want to start right off the bat with your replacement?
Let me just confirm with the clerk. Commissioner Beach?
I guess I've been to too many planning committee meetings, but did you want us to respond to the questions from the public?
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I
I was
forgot.
diligently writing
I
down.
forgot. Yes, if we just go back one step, there were questions from the public. I totally apologize. And yes, Commissioner Beach, if you could address what questions you heard, that would be great.
All right, so most of the comments that I heard were comments as opposed to questions, but I do certainly want to, I guess, agree with the comment that was made around the partnerships between museums, and that is something that we omitted when we were summarizing the committee comments. With respect to the questions that I have written down, and the dimensions around the Phoebe and what the size was and the dimensions around how it could be located, I think that the recommendations that are being put forward by staff are concepts at this time, and the recommendation would be that if one of the options is to look at relocating it in Kingston and putting it in another location or at the Steam Pump House Museum, that all those dimensions would be put together along with the site concept and how that would look with the site that's proposed. With respect to the question about whether or not it's an artifact with national significance that cannot be transferred, unfortunately right now, in terms of the involvement of the federal level in terms of artifacts, I'm not aware of anything that we would have to go through, because it really is an artifact that is the responsibility of the municipality, the City of Kingston. And in order to do anything with that, we have to follow the guidelines that we have as a museum, and as are set out by the province as well, because we're part of the provincial program of museums as well. So in terms of loaning it out, it would be a loan. It still would be an owned artifact from the City of Kingston collection, and we would have to follow all the good practices around loaning it out. With respect to storing it within the existing museum envelope, we don't think that would be feasible, and that an addition would be required. So if we were reconfiguring it on the existing site, that's something that we could look at incorporating the new addition into the museum proper itself. With respect to coming back with scenarios with different cost estimates and different options, again, that would be something that if this committee decides that they want to proceed with those scenarios, then that is the next step. We would prepare a budget to do a more detailed analysis of those scenarios and prepare detailed cost estimates. So I think their question as well about redirecting it to the Heritage Committee. The recommendation that staff has in the report is that if this committee were to look at the option and make a recommendation, that we would make that recommendation to council. Question was asked about with the visioning for either the Kingston Penn site or the Portsmouth Olympic Harbor, if there is something that could be done to locate the artifact there. And that was certainly something that was discussed at the committee level, that if there were a long-term plan, something like that, we don't have that in place right now. If we were to temporarily put it in Toledo, we could look at incorporating it in one of those sites through the visioning exercise. And the last question about staff doing things on the site to drive the Phoebe away, and I think I just would like to state that staff are not trying to do anything that would drive the Phoebe away. We're trying to look at the right long-term solution for the location of the artifact that would, in fact, incorporate it from a long-term perspective into our interpretation and how museums are run, and the solutions that have been put forward would provide for that option. So I hope I've covered the questions that have been asked.
Okay, thank you very much for those answers. Commissioner Beach, so the one answer you gave to Mr. Dixon's question about can the Phoebe right now be stored in the expanded plans for the Pump House Museum, the answer was no, like it's too large to go inside? Yes, okay. Just wanted to make sure I heard that right. Okay, so now we're good to go back to the committee and discuss the recommendation. Yeah, and if I could give the chair to Councillor Hutchinson so I can put an amendment on the floor. And this is just, if the amendment passes, then we're not going to spend a lot of time discussing the MAC committee's recommendation.
Okay, I will receive the chair and recognize you.
Thank you very much. So for this, all the Phoebe information, and thanks to everyone in the public for, corresponding with us, corresponding with the clerk and the correspondence for tonight's meeting, letters to the editor. For the three options, since last week, I've looked at this and I've laid three different options each time. So last week at this time, I was really considering going to Toledo. I never liked the long-term as a long-term solution. I was always thinking short-term solution. But then when I started reading all the letters to the editor and going through the correspondence, I know definitely, like we heard from the one public comment tonight, that this could be a partnership with the museum. But it seemed that all the other letters to the editor, the people that were responding to the Phoebe website, they were all very worried about it going to Toledo and that it might then never come back to Kingston that way. And I just didn't see much support on the website and with the letters to the editor about going to Toledo. Then last weekend, I thought that maybe we could look at Breakwater Park, putting it somewhere where there's high tourism area. And that's why, to me, I don't like going to McLaughlin Woodworking Museum site, just because you're not going to get the high traffic that you would being downtown. And then that's what then led me to the third option, which was to look at, it was option number one from the committee, and that was just to leave it where it is at the Pump House Museum, but to relocate it to that northeast corner. So what I want to move right now on the floor, if there's a seconder, is that for the museum committee recommendation that we strike out, we delete the second, therefore be it clause that talks that the Phoebe would be offered as a long-term loan to another museum, and instead replace it with option number 2. A revised version of option number 2. So option number 2 is that we recommend that the Phoebe be relocated and displayed at a city-owned site, including the Pump House Steam Museum. So this gives staff an opportunity to definitely look at that northeast corner of the Pump House Steam Museum, but also to look at possibly another city-owned site, if there's a seconder. And it is? Oh. Sorry, no, not his motion. Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, and it's seconded by Councillor Candon. Or no. Okay.
And you're going to run the meeting and put your motion. Anyway, I'm just teasing you. Okay, so it's on the floor. And now discussion. You've given your opening remarks. And of course, you can usually allow members to speak as often as they like, but you certainly have the opportunity to speak last. So I'll open it up to any comments from other councillors. I see Councillor Holland and then Councillor Candon so far.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I found this process a little bit confusing in that, yes, the recommendation came from the committee, but until we have more information from staff on the implications of various locations, we are essentially talking about all of the requirements that need to be fulfilled in order to redo the Pump House Steam Museum, reinvigorate, reinterpret that space, continue to house the Phoebe somewhere. There's so many hypotheticals right now that without more information coming back from staff, I'm having great difficulty understanding what the most appropriate course of action is. However, I feel very strongly that having the Phoebe be transported along the 401 past our signs that say where history and innovation thrive is a major problem. I don't think that it makes any sense. I think we are actually innovative enough to find a resolution here that involves having the Phoebe remain in Kingston and become part of all of the different ideas that were discussed tonight as far as the waterfront master plan, the new heritage committee, how it could be, how other people can continue to have a say in the future of this artifact. So for that reason, I will support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Candon.
Thank you. I guess I'd just like to reiterate what you said there. I feel like if there is an instance where it does leave town, it's because we've completely exhausted all opportunities, and that I do see this as just really something worth having, and wherever it is will likely be a great place to go because it's there. And there's only so many of those that any town can have, and I just feel reluctant to see that leave the city. This isn't something that I'm an expert in any way, shape, or form, but my gut feeling tells me that keeping a significant piece like this is, there's value in that, and it's important, even though I do understand a lot of the theories on both sides of it, in the sense that it could be a nice piece for tourism in another city. But I guess I just am not necessarily convinced that someone in Ohio would see a beautiful boat from Kingston and be convinced to come here. I think that it's just its highest and best use is to remain in Kingston. And unless something changes my mind, I think that I would try to, I'm going to be voting to try to keep it within the city limits.
I have some comments, so I would have to give you the chair, and then you can give it back to me, okay?
I take the chair, recognize you. Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you. I have some of the same concerns. I think the argument about partnerships with other museums is an important one, because that does go on, and it does, I think, have some good results. But what I'm concerned about here is just how well the Phoebe would survive and how long it would be away. I think if it's like 10 years, if that's what, I heard that number, I don't know whether it's, backed up in any way, but if it was, there's a danger that we'll be gone and we'll never see it again. And even though it would probably be well looked after. Also, the way things work is the costs go with it of maintaining it, and then they have to be reintroduced to look after it when it comes back. And that is a bit of a risk, a political risk, that I'm not sure I'm willing to deal with. And if it did go, I just want to say now that maybe 3 years, or how long, or perhaps another way of looking at it is how long does it take to do the renovation and expansion of the Pump House Museum. There has to be some measure, and it would have to be a defined amount of time. So with this, so I'm not dismissing that, but this amendment doesn't allow for it. And I think the way Councillor Holland and Councillor Candon are thinking of it, and probably Councillor Sanik, is let's not give up just yet. Let's find out what we can do. And I think I'm willing to say it's worthwhile investing in some kind of concept plan about what we need to do to preserve it in a good way. And that's staff's intent. Like, if you're going to have it, do it right. That's what I get from what staff say. And I'm willing to do that, I think, because of the reasons I mentioned when I was asking questions. It's part of the Davis Dry Dock, it's part of our industrial background and heritage. I think that's important. People need to remember that. And who knows, it may come back someday. It's like the locomotive in so many ways. No one wanted to invest that kind of money. We worked it out. And I think we should look at volunteers, like the way we looked at 9 North Street and the high school program. that allows for that. That's a cost cutter if you've got good direction. We have other volunteers perhaps. There's the Carpenters Union, you know. See who we can draw in. I think it's all good and a good community effort. And the other thing that underlines the way I think about this is that, like the locomotive, I looked at the locomotive, it's an asset. Did we look after it? No, we did not. Okay, now we have. And now we're going to have it, and it's going to be there in the most photographed artifact in the city, I think, by a long shot. And all those buses go over there and have their pictures taken. So in the right spot, maybe the Phoebe can be an important, if lesser, artifact. And showing part of our heritage and history as well. So do we have to pay? Yeah, I guess so. I mean, we're lucky that people have looked after it and refurbished it, and it's probably cheaper than the locomotive by a long shot, because we're preserving something that's already in good shape. So why not do it from that point of view? If you've got these assets, you have this inheritance, you should look after it. And so that's why I'm willing to support the amendment, because I think it's a step in the right direction to find out where we can go. And hopefully council will agree if it passes this committee. So I do want to say that I appreciate the comments of the public and of the committee as well. I just think it's not time to quite send it down the road yet. And even if it goes down there, I will not vote ever for it be gone for a long time. Thank you.
Okay, I give you, but return the chair to you.
Thank you. So, are there any other councillors? I think this councillor doesn't wish to speak. He's in listening mode. So I will ask Councillor Sanik if she wishes to have the last word. She says not. So in that sense, I will ask for the vote on the amendment to the motion, right? Sorry? That's what I'm saying, on the amendment to the motion. Okay, all those in favor? Those opposed? Okay, that passes. Now we're back to the motion as originally presented. That being the case, I can turn the chair to Ms. Osanek, or the chair Osanek,
Yep.
Excuse me.
All right, thank you, I accept it. Thanks. So now we're back to the main motion from the Museum Committee. So as amended, does anyone want to speak to the main motion that has been amended? Nope. All right, so we're ready to vote. So basically the only part that's been added from our amendment then is that now staff are being directed to bring us back a plan, more details. Okay, so all those in favor of the main motion? And it carries. Thanks very much, and that is that business report. Now our second business report is the progress on the Museum and Collections Advisory Committee, and that is that the report card be approved as a summary of the work accomplished, and that the report card be made available as a resource to Heritage Kingston on matters pertaining to civic museums and collections. Yes, and I'll go to staff if they want to introduce it, if they have any comments on it. Or I'll also ask the past chair, Mr. Visser, do you want to make any comments on the report card? Only if you want to.
I'll defer to Mr. Visser, as he is the outgoing chair and was actually the author of this report. Okay.
Yes, Mr. Visser, yes.
Thank you. Well, as it says, it is just a recap of what we've done in the last year, plus the 2 months for the short time that we continue to exist in 2016. It is our desire that the stuff be used going forward as information, and hopefully it goes forward. The committee, I thought, did a lot in the time that we did exist, and from me, to the committee. I want to thank all the members for their work on the committee and the time, and I just hope things keep on going. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We definitely, as council, appreciate the work of a chair who's not a city staff, so a chair of a committee from the public who does the work, and putting these report cards together is very helpful. And we now have it as part of our procedural bylaws that every advisory committee is supposed to start doing these report cards each year to keep a big history going of the committee. So thank you for doing these report cards. Are we ready to vote on it, to accept it? Any questions? No? Okay, all those in favor of receiving? Oh, sorry, I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Hutchison, seconded by Councillor Candon, and that had passed, had been carried. Now we go into report 2B, and it's the report received from the Housing and Homelessness Advisory Committee, and they are amendments to the definitions in the 10-year Municipal Housing and Homeless Plan. They're on pages 5, 6, if everybody read those proposed new definitions. Do we have a mover and a seconder so we can discuss the definitions? Moved by Councillor Candon and seconded by Councillor McLaren. Are there any questions to the proposed new definitions? I suppose Councillor Hutchison has some. Yes, Councillor Hutchison.
No, I don't have any comments, thanks.
Did you have questions? Maybe I just put you on the spot.
Sometimes staff do have something to say about why we're getting these changes. Maybe they're nakedly obvious, but not to me.
I've been advised that the staff that worked on this particular plan, because it's the housing department, they're not here. If you have questions, Councillor Hutchison, you can bring it forward when it comes to council at the next council meeting.
That's probably what I do. I would point out that there are fallouts of this. Oh.
We'll just wait for Councillor McLaren to come back. All right, go right ahead.
I'll wait till we get to council.
Council?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because there's nobody here to answer the questions anyway. Thanks.
All right. Okay, so I think we're ready to vote. All right, all those in favor of those new definitions, and it carries. Okay, so, now we're at a motion. It's my motion. So, Councillor Hutchison, can you take over for motion 8A? Take the floor, please.
I can. The busy Ms. Councillor Osanek. Okay, I accept the chair and I recognize you.
Thanks. So I would like to propose a motion, please, and it's seconded by Councillor McLaren. And at last ARC meeting, we heard updates about baseball fields, and a lot of the work has been finished, but a bit of work is still outstanding. And so this is just asking that staff come back at the end of September with a report about what has been finished this year and what still might be outstanding, because this will come before we go into budget. So then we'll know what cannot be done at all or what might need more money for next year. So my motion is just that staff prepare a status report for the September ARC meeting on the outstanding issues.
Okay, is there any comments? Councillor Camden? And you've got one too? Okay.
We're not allowed to ask a question, are we? We have to, it would be just a comment. Yeah, there's no one to ask a question to. I guess I'll make a comment because this is very close to my district, and we kind of share districts and a lot of people, going in the proximity. But I was thinking of trying to organize something to raise money for this in the community. So maybe after the meeting or whatever, if anybody's interested in seeing where I go with that. But I was thinking, because of the area, I was thinking of seeing if I could raise funds from local businesses to chip in, maybe in the form of sponsorships to some of the things that are being fixed. So maybe one baseball diamond gets named after a certain company that gives a huge amount of money to, or a small amount of money, I don't know, similar to what Carico did at Invista, where they have the Carico field. So if that's an option, then I'm happy to put my time in to see if we can get local businesses or individuals to contribute money on their own to something like this, because I think there'd probably be a few people willing to do that. So if that's something that we would like to do, then I'm happy to put my time in on that.
Chair, I forgot. I will recognize you. Have you got anything to say? I know Councillor McLaren was first, actually, so he's next.
I guess since there's no staff here, it doesn't matter, but there was a comment in the council update about vandalism on one of the fields. Somebody had apparently driven a truck through them and anyway, I was just wondering if that was going to hurt or help what this motion would do, but I guess it's neither here nor there since there's nobody to answer.
I'll just wrap it up since I'm the mover to say that, Councillor Camden, there's the RFI that staff put as part of the report last time, right? And so I'll copy you and follow up with staff when they do the RFI, and then that's when we could try to advertise it, maybe, like make the RFI well known, so that's where people could, could reply to it and say that they're interested in sponsoring. Okay, great. So that's all I wanted to say. So I think we can vote on it.
Thank you. I have a comment before we do it. I thought most, and maybe one of you got an answer to this, I thought most of the issues were maintenance issues, and that they weren't caring for the, we weren't, let's put it this way, we weren't caring for the fields in a way that enhanced their use or encouraged people to play baseball. And so I don't know where the fundraising would be directed, but I guess I'll leave that to you two guys and figure out. I don't think, most people don't give money to maintenance issues, but so we may have to cough up the money, right? I mean, in the budget, we're going to make it work. So that's my impression of what they said. Still, that's what I want to do. There's an outlet. That's great. So anyway, if we're all, no other comments, no comments from the public, then I will call the vote. All those in favor? That passes unanimous.
Excellent. Okay, so there's no notices.
I give you back the chair.
Oh, thank you. I'm just jumping right in. It's Easter. There's no notices of motion. There's no other business. Correspondence we had from Mr. Warren Black, as well as, we had a lot of correspondence, and also the one on the addeds tonight. And the date and time of the next meeting is April 28th at 6 p.m. And now a mover to adjourn the meeting. Moved by Councillor Cannon, seconded by Councillor Hutchison. All those in favor? Thanks very much. Happy Easter. Okay, thanks, James.